I don't remember too much. I don't know if I passed out or if I started slipping into a semi-coma, but they then induced me into a coma for 2 weeks. So I will hand it off to Jeanne.
Well, the last thing that they had to get permission from Dan to be put on a ventilator, which, you know, those are scary, but he couldn't breathe, so he went ahead and gave permission to be on the ventilator. JJ showed up. I'll back up a little bit. I called JJ and I said, Dad's not doing well. Can you come home? And he said, well, I got to get a sub real quick. And he worked real quick on that. And I don't want to say too much because that might be his part, but he did show up and follow the ambulance. But they turned him away when he got to the hospital. So he came back, and that was a God thing because he was staying with me, and we got the call at 2:09 that same day in the afternoon, and I had missed the call. For some reason, it went into voice mail, and it was Dr. Qureshi. He was a pulmonary specialist, and he said, Mrs. Harry, he said, your husband is taking a turn for the worse. He's on life support. And my world just, you know, so that was tough. But he was with me, and he was such a strength for me. So anyway, the problem is that I got a call the next morning from Dr. Qureshi, and he said, you really need to come in. He's not doing well. Well, I was still sick with COVID. I mean, I couldn't even stand up for maybe 2 minutes was it, you know, and just intense, and the intestinal, you know, running to the bathroom and just super weak. So JJ goes, Mom, you can't go to the hospital right now, you're too sick. Well, you can't see anybody in the COVID unit. They don't let anybody in, but Dr. Qureshi was going to make certain provisions for me to come in, and it was basically to say goodbye. So anyway, I never did go in because I was just too ill, and from then on we just started getting phone calls from different doctors. One would be the kidney doctor. He's in kidney failure. I mean, it was just, you know, how long? 2 weeks of...
2.5.
2.5 weeks. Every time the phone would ring, my stomach would get into knots, and I would put the phone on speakerphone so that he could hear too. He was always there when the phone rang, and he would journal everything. You know, the doctor's name, the date, the time, you know, what the problem was. And his breathing, he was on 100% oxygen, just not doing well. Everything was shutting down. So I remember there were nights, and I didn't cry. I think I went into shock. But there were nights when I was actually planning his funeral, getting ready for that. So, did you want to share, JJ?
Sure. Yeah, so during that time, I got just in time as they were wheeling him out into the ambulance, and I let him know that, hey, I'm here, I'll be with Mom. And she wanted me to follow the ambulance and see if I could find anything else out, but they turned me away. So I came back, and then it was just a couple days before Christmas break for school, so I just spent my entire break at home with Mom. And just like she said, I was there because she was there to take in all the information, and she had power of attorney, so she was making all the decisions, and I was just there to help coach her if she needed it, or like, oh no, ask him to repeat that, have him spell it, and we just made sure that we got all the drugs he was on, what percentage of oxygen he was on, and just people that were coming in and out. And we had a system where we would call at least twice a day. We talked to the morning shift, and then we talked to the night shift. And, you know, we enjoyed talking to the nurses more than the doctors. As you guys know, bedside manner's not great. Yeah, so they said, you got to come in, and half of it was, Mom was too sick, but the other part was we knew that if we were going to go in, it was to say goodbye. And so we kept kind of pushing that away, And they had said, he is the sickest person we've seen in 2 years. And, a little bit was like, it's almost like they didn't want to try, So, we just kept praying, and we just kept taking it day by day. And, Mom talked about planning his funeral. I went too far into the future. Duty kicked in. In my head, he was already dead. I was worried about taking care of my mom. I was going to move in, get out of the lease of my apartment, and see how long we could keep the house. Put my future on hold. I've always had thoughts and prayers for maybe one day meeting someone, but the duty kicked in. I'm like, you know what? Let's put the wife thing on hold. Just worry about taking care of Mom.
I was working on it when I was asleep. All's not lost.
That's right.
Sorry, I needed some humor relief.
So, we just kind of kept recording everything, and then all of a sudden, I think it was maybe the day of, I went back to work, because I thought that would be a good idea. Here, go hang out with teenagers, they'll be good for you. Mom got a call that his eyes fluttered, and kind of opened his eyes. And then soon they started doing tests about, like they could tell through your eyes if if parts of your brain were working. They worked on brain waves. And they said, no, his brain waves are good. Some of that was a bit of a double-edged sword, because I'm like, oh, that's great. Oh, wait, is there any changes we can make along? But yeah, just very slow improvements. The eyes, and then all of a sudden, one of the nurses got his eyes were open, and she immediately started asking him yes or no questions. And he was understanding. He was trying to communicate back to her. And then when we got that, we were like, oh, great, And we were just taking every little thing as a victory. Mm-hmm. And we, because they're like 6 months to a year, and he might not be the same. And so we're like, okay, and so little by little, we took each day. It was very difficult for me because I felt the need to be the strong one through all this. My brother has his own family to worry about, and no wife, no kids, no problem, right? So I took it upon myself, but I kind of took on too much. And I went too far into the future, and I tried to figure everything out too quickly, and it broke me down to where we went to go visit his sister, and my uncle noticed I wasn't right. And I've known that for a long time. I'm your son, so where does it come from?
Apple tree doesn't fall far.
So he took me outside. He goes, is there anything you want to get off your chest? And I finally was able to unload. But I really hadn't had anyone to talk to.
Yeah.
Because I was just listening to Mom, and that was tough, because I was 24/7 trying to make sure my mom wasn't going to crumble. We had to be careful on TV shows we watched.
just as an escape.
My mother likes to watch those horrible Hallmark movies. and
That'll make a man out of you.
Oh, yeah.
Just to watch, get through it.
And they always have a character that is recovering from a loss of a loved one. Just to add dynamic to the whole, and I'm just sitting there, I'm like, ugh. You don't really notice how many characters are recovering from a loss of a loved one until you're watching stuff. But there were little things like logging into Amazon Prime Video and his profile picture's right there when we're clicking on it. Or into YouTube when we click on his profile to go watch it. And I'm just sitting there, I'm like, okay, there's a picture of my dad when he's healthy. How's my mom gonna take this? It was just little things like that, you know? What can I do? Can I make her laugh? What do I need to listen at this time? It was difficult to kind of manage all of these events and these emotions, and during that time I wasn't managing myself, and it hit me later. Kind of affected my work. I was short with the kids. But then, Mom, you want to talk about when you got moved to Kindred?
Yeah, they actually moved him out of the COVID unit at Mission Hospital into what they call a critical care unit. And we went ahead and all of us were trying to make appointments to get COVID test. You had to have a COVID test to get into the hospital. So Nate was able to get in first. So he went and saw his dad on the 6th of January, but I'll back up. He actually opened his eyes January 1st. And the nurse said, do you know where you are? And she said he was able to shake his head no. And so she kind of went through, well, this is what happened and this is where you are. And then on the...
Which is a very big help, because all you're doing is looking at the ceiling.
Yeah.
You know, and not have a clue.
The nurses were awesome. They were so great. And every time I'd call, they'd give me some hope where the doctors did not.
Or where I had improved.
Right. Oxygen is a little bit better. You know, he's at 45% instead of 100%, meaning what they have to pump into him. I had to make decisions on a trach. So I went ahead and okayed for him to have a trach put in. And then at the same time, they put a feeding tube in where they have to insert that in the stomach. So they were feeding him that way. Let's see. There were a couple drugs. Well,
You can let him talk about that.
Well, I don't even know what I was on. You guys.
They had you like fentanyl and Oxycontin.
he was on fentanyl at Mission. I said, what is he on? And they said, well, he's on fentanyl. And I said, why? Well, he said,
Well, you got to remember that I went in at 415 pounds. So last time you saw me, I was that heavy. But I gained even more weight because I was retaining all the fluid because my kidney shut down. So I looked like the Michelin Man or Marshmallow Man. My hands were like, I don't know how she got my wedding ring off,
without
but
cutting it.
my hand looked like this. And my fingers were all swollen. My legs and my feet were all swollen. They were in those compression boots, you know, and I looked like, this.
You know, like when you were a kid,
Yeah.
you take the latex gloves and you blow them up, right? That's what he looked
That's what I look like.
So January 3rd, they moved him into the critical care unit, and then we were, as a family, we could go in and see him. So Nate went first. He got tested first and went in and visited with him. But it was very difficult because he couldn't talk, and he really couldn't move much. He was pretty much paralyzed from the neck down. He just couldn't move. And so that was the one thing that was really difficult, because when we'd go in, he would move his lips, but we didn't really know what he was saying.
I forgot to teach them how to lip read before I went in, you know, but I didn't know, so.
So we ended up with a system where this was 1, this was 2, bless you, this was 3, and this was 4. you know, so,
Just so she could rub them.
I would go in and rub his hands, you know, with lotion because they just ate because they were so swollen, you know. And then pretty soon, he could get enough air and kind of yell something out with the trach, but it'd scare you half to death.
Yeah.
You know, so I'd be working
One
on
vowel,
this.
that's it, just one
And
utterance.
then pretty soon he'd go, 2, real loud. And I go, okay, 2 is the left leg, all right. So then I started working on that foot, you know, and then JJ put a system together, you know, so the nurses would know what 1, 2, 3, 4 was, you know, because they were trying to understand him as well. Then I got a call from Dr. Coley. He was part of the team, and he said we have gotten him to a point where now he needs to be moved to a acute care long-term hospital. I knew nothing about these, and it was Kindred hospitals. They're a chain. And so I went ahead and called Denny because I was on overload. And I went, Denny, I need your help. I don't know anything about Kindred hospitals. And he said, I'm on it. And he was awesome. And he did research on the Fountain Valley one and the Santa Ana one. He gave me all kinds of documentation. He was so cute. Put it in an envelope and he put it under my mat. And then he texted me. He said, when you're ready, it's under your mat. So I went through all of that, and they had a really good reputation. So I said I would really like him in the Fountain Valley because it was a larger hospital, and that you
Westminster.
Oh, I'm sorry, it was Westminster, you're right. So anyway, they had a bed available, but he had to be transported by ambulance, and there had to be a doctor and a technician in there. And they just couldn't get it to work. So I finally got a call. There were 3 different calls that I got. There's a bed available. Oh no, this is not gonna work out. So the 3rd call was the Santa Ana Hospital, and they had an available room for him. And the ambulance came in the evening and picked him up and took him in. By that time, he was doing pretty well. He was breathing probably at 40% oxygen. He was stable, so they thought that would be a good time to move him. Well, they no sooner get him there, and I get a call. He's crashed. He's got a lung infection. He's not doing well. We're not sure he's going to make it. So that was
When you're flat on your back for, it was just at that point a month and a half. Your lower lungs collapse because they're not being used. And so that started to fill up with fluid. And so I got COVID pneumonia. And so,
so anyway, JJ and I went in to see him, and we thought this was going to be a goodbye again. And I said to the nurse, what is he on? Because his eyes kept rolling back. Well, he's on Oxycontin. And I looked over at JJ and he went, no, Mom, that's a bad drug. So I said, can we get him off that? Maybe put him on Norco. And they said, yeah, we could put
Vicodin.
Yeah. So they put him on Norco, and then you were able to kind of recognize us, and we could at least, he knew that we showed up, you know. Otherwise, he was out of it, you know.
And
I was pretty out.
you were too stoned. It was just,
Yeah.
it wasn't even worth a visit. You didn't even know you were there.
They were concerned because I was restless in bed, and my restlessness was from the narcotics that were giving to me because they thought I was in excruciating pain. So, and somebody my size, they thought the dosage was appropriate, but little did they know that I rarely take Advil or Tylenol, you know, so I'm in la-la land. And fentanyl can kill you if it's not administered properly. She got me off of that admission, and then she got me off of that, of Oxycontin at Kindred. But during those 6 weeks of being on such strong medication, I had the worst experience of my life. I had nightmares, hallucinations, thinking things were real when they weren't, because I had nowhere to go. I was unconscious, and all you have is your unconscious mind. and it's like you're trapped in your own body. I couldn't move anything from my neck down, and I couldn't communicate, which is, for a talker and a teller, you don't do that to a person. Or the fact that I'm paralyzed from the neck down, you don't do that to a controller or a decision maker. You just don't do that to them because they go crazy. And I thought I was. I thought I would never get out of this prison, which was my own body. And my thoughts went, Lord, is this going to be my life? Is this going to be any kind of life for Jeanne and for my family to have to take care of me in this kind of a state? So my focus was on me. It was on my circumstances, and I lost it. And by the time I had recovered well enough to be taken out of ICU at Kindred in Santa Ana, I was becoming more cognizant of my surroundings, even though I have very little recollection from the COVID unit, the CCI unit admission, or the ICU unit in Santa Ana. It wasn't until I was brought into isolation in room 18 where I started to be able to be more cognizant of my surroundings and the people who were visiting with me. And at that point, all I could think of was my circumstances. I was in the here and now mostly, and not thinking too futuristic, which is my brain type style, and getting darker and deeper into a depression, not clinical depression, just depressed. And I just didn't know what the future was going to hold, and so I started thinking in my mind, okay, how can we make this work? I got to get out of here. I got to go home. I was so homesick because I didn't understand who came to come visit me with me. I don't even remember my older sister and her husband coming and visiting me at the ICU unit, and I just very smitten, very small moments where I was cognizant enough to know that Jeanne was there, or that JJ was there, or that Nate was there, and who knows what I said or did, or I can't be held responsible.
With me, one of the first things you asked was about Mom. Is she taken care of? Like, is this okay? What's going on here? And I told you everything was taken care of. She's good, and you were at ease.
That meant so much, and because you're a controller sitting there not being able to do anything, and you're out of your mind trying to figure out a way out of this thing, and what can I do? And I couldn't do anything, and so I configured what we could do to make this work, and I could come home, and so I called Jeanne, like you heard. And she answered the phone, and she wouldn't let me have my cell phone for the longest time. So it was her bad, and she brought it to the hospital.
Couldn't work it.
I couldn't hold it up to my ear. I couldn't put my glasses on. I couldn't scratch my nose. I couldn't, do.
Was this January or February?
No, it was March.
March, okay.
Yeah. And the nurses would have to prop this up and put a pillow behind it so I could talk to my wife. And so I said, Jeanne, I said, just hear me out. Let me get this out, and then you can respond. So I walked her through the plan that I had configured in my brain, which is probably not all there at this time, but I got it all out, and of course my doctors had heard my complaints that I wanted to go home and all that, and they're like, sure, yeah, no problem. And they know there's no way they're going to sign me out. I'm not even close to being ready. And so Jeanne, bless her heart, just heard me out, And when I was done, there was no hesitation. There was no gap of time. And what came back was, no, you're not coming home.
That's right.
I was crushed, you know. But I kind of knew better. But
I didn't say it like that.
I wish you did.
He heard it
it sounded like
like
that.
that.
My plans just got thwarted. There was a rejection. And so I cut the conversation short at that point. I said, this is futile. No, but she was gracious and said, honey, there's no way I can take care of you. And you're too big for me to be able to, if you fall, you do this, you do that. I can't
He was
do
just
that.
barely moving his fingers, let alone nothing else. Look, I can take care of
But
it.
again, my focus was on my circumstances, and I was over it. I was done with this whole thing. And never been in the hospital for that length of time. I've been in surgeries before and in and out in 7 days or whatever. This was a whole new world for me. And so we hung up and said goodbye. Told her I still loved her, even though she broke my heart. But I was so homesick, I didn't care. I was just thinking about myself. So I called her the next morning and apologized and asked her to forgive me. I said, honey, it's just so selfish of me to ask that of you. And I'm sorry I put you through that anguish and that stress to think that you were going to need to take care of me and to bring me home in this kind of a state. She is so wise. She said, it's okay, Eddie. I understand. And so that night, I had an experience with God I'd never had before. And it was at night, about 2 o'clock in the morning, as much as I could tell. And it was pretty dark in my room, but I went to a place where it was absolute nothingness. There was no light, no shadows, no figures that you could recognize or anything, and no sound. It was a state of nothingness I've never been in before. I knew I was alone. There was no one there with me. Yet I wasn't fearful of being alone. It was just nothingness. And I'm still focused on my circumstances, but in this state of blackness, darkness, I had the wherewithal to cry out to the Lord. I said, where are you? And as much as there was nothing there at that moment, the 2 words I heard come back to me filled that void of not feeling anything in that environment, where he filled it with his presence when he said, I'm here. And that's all he said. And I felt a comfort and a peaceful presence that not only had passed my understanding, but that I'd never experienced before in my life. And I knew I was going to be okay. He didn't say anything else to me. He says, I'm here. And I woke up the next morning refreshed. And I said, okay, God, I didn't ask for this, but here I am. This is my new front line. So let's get to work. And I purpose to change my focus from that point forward, to get it off of my circumstances, and to start loving and caring for the people that were caring for me. Because I can tell you right now, going around the room, just as we have concerns and cares, so do they. These nurses, these LVNs, these CNAs, these janitorial support crew that come and clean my room every day. I learned every one of their names, memorized it, started asking them questions about their life, and you would not imagine the kinds of responses I got and how much information they were willing to give me about their lives, their families, their aspirations, their careers. And I just loved on them. That's all I did. I just care for these people who've seen so much death over the last 2.5 years. They take it home with them every night. And when I was at Kindred, there would be days that there would be 4 or 5 blue codes, code blues up and down the hallway. Some got lost, some were lost, and some were revived. And when you're listening to that, you hear everything in the hospital. You don't go to the hospital for privacy or rest. No, there is no rest. I mean, poke prodded, blood extracted. I mean, if I got 3 hours of consistent sleep in any given night, I was grateful. You'd wake up every morning at 4 o'clock to take blood, whatever. It was just constant. So I would sleep during the daytime for a nap of an hour or two, whatever, just because I was exhausted all the time. So what God did for me when I changed my focus was He exponentially started my recovery. And I saw myself rapidly make progress in my recovery because I no longer focused on my circumstances. And I fought and I fought and I fought, and I tried to do everything that I could do with whatever energy I had because I wanted to go home still. But no longer was I there for myself. I was there for these people because I could get beyond myself, and I could get beyond COVID, and I could make a difference with my life right where I was in the condition that I was in. And as God can only do, He sent me a companion that would wake me up in the morning, tapping on the window. Only my window. I asked all the nurses, is he going to other windows? They said, no, we don't hear him anywhere but your window. He sent me a sparrow, a little red sparrow, to wake me up in the morning. He'd fly away, come back, tap, 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 tap. I said, I wish I knew sparrow Morse code. I can't understand a word he's saying. There's no bugs on the window for him to eat or anything. But he was incessant of tapping on the window. Sometimes he'd sleep in and he wouldn't get there at 7:30, get there at 7:45. And he was always there every day that I was in that room 21, which was when I first got a roommate. I got the window. And so my roommate wasn't really happy that he would come and wake us up all the time, but he was relentless every day until I left home. So I videotaped him so I could bring him home with me.
No meetings.
But I
that
just
song, huh?
remembered that
His
song.
eyes on the sparrow. Yeah, his eyes on the
His
sparrow.
eyes on the sparrow, and he watches over me.
That's right.
And it just, isn't that God?
Yes.
It's just, and that was just because I finally got the message. Danny, you're here for them. I'm here for you. I'm here, he said. I'm here. So I could let go. And I'm telling you guys what Brian talked about today, I lived out. I've never been through a full surrender. And I don't know if you know what that means, but in our Christian life, we go momentarily through experiences with the Holy Spirit, and He brings to our minds certain areas of our life that we need to release to Him, to surrender to Him, to let go of, for our own good. But never in my life have I gone through a full surrender, which I had nothing to give Him, nothing to grab onto, to hold on to, to not really let go to him. I had nothing. I was paralyzed from the neck down for 2.5 months before I was released into isolation, where I had that moment with God where he helped me understand that he was here and that I need to get busy, that I'm doing my job on my new front line. That's when everything changed for me. And it was so hard to go through the first 2.5 months because I was out of my mind and having hallucinations and being restless in bed. They were afraid to take me off the medication because they thought I would pull all these things out, which I learned that there's a thing called sunset syndrome. And people who have Alzheimer's or post-surgery people that have all these tubes in them, the sun goes down and all of a sudden they just have these normal reactions. And so they were afraid that I would do the same thing because at Mission, before she allowed them to give me a trach, I had all these tubes going down my throat and in my nose and everywhere else they could find a hole. And it was just something that I'm glad I was out of it, you know, because I would have fought it. And so I was grateful for their wisdom. And you want to share this woman that was part of your Bible study?
Yes, Tuesday night women's Bible study, there was a woman named Marion in my group. I just met her for the first time, and she trained nurses at Mission Hospital. And so she had seen the prayer request that Jeannie's husband, you know, came down with COVID and is at the hospital, but she didn't know what hospital. It wasn't written down there. So she was working at Mission, and she thought, well, I'm just gonna go see if I can see if her husband's here. So she went up to the COVID unit, and sure enough, she saw the last name Hare, and she said to the nurses, she goes, oh, I know his wife. And we're all praying for him. And she comforted me because she sent me an email back, and she said, the A team is working on Danny right now. And it was a team of
9 physicians.
9 doctors. So there were kidney doctors and pulmonary doctors and infectious disease. And she said they were the best of the best. And they were. There were a couple drugs that they called me about, and I said, don't you dare put them on me. One thing that, for me, going through this for 5 months is I realized that I'm stronger than I thought. You know, I was able to take control, and I did call my older son over, and I said, I know I'm power of attorney. I went in Dan's office, and that was hard to go in his office. I found the notebook with all the living trust stuff in it, and I said, I don't know where to find, the POA, the power of attorney. And he goes, well, Mom, I'll take care of that. And he turned to section 5, and he goes, oh yeah, you guys have it all filled out. You are the power of attorney. And I had paperwork I had to fill out, so that's where he was able to come over and help me with paperwork, all the legal stuff. So I got that taken care of, and then we had done some research prior to coming down with COVID, so we knew what drugs were pretty lethal, you know, that weren't working on COVID patients. And so they would always call me and say, you know, we want to put him on this. No, don't put him on that. Okay, you know, and so God gave me strength through it.
Remdesivir is.
Remdesivir was what they wanted to put him on.
And if they did it prior to kidney failure, they were having some success with it. In combination of respirator. But if you were past that and your kidneys were shutting down, it just killed you. It's because your kidneys couldn't recover from that, you know. So that was, you know, things we had to watch out for.
So it was good to know that some of the drugs that we had researched, I didn't want him on. You know, they would call me, so that was good ahead of time. But Johnny kept saying, I call him Johnny. Johnny kept saying, Mom, it's okay to cry, you know. But I'm that kind of person where I'm strong through it and then I fall apart. You know, so I stayed pretty strong, and don't you think?
When he went back to work is when you felt, because you were home alone.
He said, Mom, I gotta go back to work. Is that gonna be okay with you? And I said, I will be just fine. I know I hate you guys, real close by. But God gave me a strength to get through it, and
But you had your moments where you could let go.
yeah. I mean, I remember coming back from the hospital and I couldn't find my ID, and I tore my purse apart, and I just started crying and crying, you know. And I had changed out of my jeans, put shorts on, went back in my closet, and there was my ID. I had slipped it in the back pocket of my jeans, but I fell apart. I just, you know, and that was just from trying to keep strong, you know. So there were a couple things like that where, you know, I just kind of let it go. And that was healthy, because you gotta do that. But
And when they came to visit me, you know, they're trying to be strong and positive and encouraging and all that kind of stuff. And I'm laying in there and not being able to do a thing, you know. And the feeling of uselessness kind of runs across your brain. And everything that you've done to this point in being a provider, a protector, and a preserver of the faith for your family, you can't do anymore. And that fell on her. All the bills, everything, all the finances, everything, and she championed all of that beautifully. And you know, you're a pair, you're a team, and then all of a sudden you're faced with that all by yourself. And it was a shock at first, but she ponied up and did it beautifully. And I need to say this at this time for you guys, and that is, this church family is awesome. What you guys have done for my family and for me, how can I ever say thank you enough to let you know the impact that this church has made for us during this time. We've been here over 20 years, previous church another 23 years. God's family is awesome. And not only did this family, the word went out to small groups, went out to our extended family and their churches and their networks of people. The power of prayer in my life is a testament to why I'm here today in the condition that I'm in. The hospital said it would be 6 months to a year before I would be released from the hospital. I got home at month 5, and this is now today, month 6. And I'm way ahead of any of their expectations. I earned the nickname Miracle Man at the Kindred Hospital. They had some really cool things that they did for patients that they fell in love with, and I fell in love with them. They gave me a gold star on my profile because I was a model patient. I was very, very proud of that. But that was only
Perfect
possible.
attendance.
Yes.
There every day.
It was, it was very reassuring and comforting to me to hear these nurses come in and talk to me about my condition when I was in the ICU unit. Because they saw me there, and I said, "Oh, Danny, do you remember me? I cared for you in the ICU." And I'm fumbling, trying, because I don't have any recollection at that point, and I didn't know faces and names at that time. And I just would smile and, "Oh, thank you for loving me and caring for me. What was I like?" And then they would tell me.
you were
And-
noisy. You had a
Yeah.
Puerto Rican nurse in ICU. Every time I'd call her, "He noisy, he very noisy." And I kept thinking, what was it that she thought he was in pain, crying out, but you were hallucinating. So they just kept giving him more drugs, thinking he was in pain. But we would be amiss if we didn't thank one special person right now, and that is Linda Frigger. I mean, she championed taking on informing this church.
Yes.
She called me, she would find out all the updates because I couldn't handle phone calls at that time, and she just did a beautiful job, and I just
She
want to
protected you.
personally thank you for being my protector. And boy, she was. She really made sure that I was okay and kept those prayers going. And I mean, it went to other states. I mean, Mark O'Connor called us from Arizona. People came out of the woodwork that used to be at this church that have moved, and we finally found out, and you know. So thank you. You were a big help on that, and I love you to pieces for doing that.
I love you too.
For keeping, and you even kept the staff up, you know, on what was going on. So thank you for that.
But the power of prayer, don't let anybody tell you that it won't change your life, because when that's, you know the phrase, you never know that Jesus is the only thing you need until he's the only thing you have. When you're in that state of full surrender and you can do nothing for yourself and you're totally dependent on everyone else doing everything for you. It's the most humiliating experience to go through. It's a death to yourself that you don't volunteer to go through. But when God allows that, even though nefarious people are causing that, I've learned a lot from my physicians. I've learned a lot from research that I've done. And much of the things that we have been told are not true. Much of the things that we understand about this thing will come to light. And I just want you to do one thing. I don't want any of us to have any separation. Do not let this thing separate you from your family, from believers or whatever, because we all have to make our own decisions about our health. Our health is personal to us. And just remember that as things unfold, is to remember that he's here. He's with you. And you can make it through anything if you just stay focused on him. And don't get focused on your circumstances like I did. Because I've wasted a couple of months. You know, I don't know if I was off drugs, it might have helped, but I'm glad for that experience, because I would have missed some wonderful people to get to know. People that I've never met in my lifetime. So God, even though he's created a system to where he can step back and allow us the freedom to make choices and decisions for ourselves, we seed, that gets planted, and there's a harvest. And sometimes the harvest is evil because we planted an evil seed. He gives us the freedom to choose what kind of seeds we plant every day of our life, whether it's by word or by deed. And unfortunately, we live in a world where some people are planting evil seeds, and the harvest affects us, good people. But God's promise in his word is not that he will protect us from evil. That evil will affect our life and hurt us. But God does promise one thing, that he will bring about good even though evil has befallen us. He won't make good out of that evil because he has no relationship with evil. But he will cause good to come to us if our eyes are on him. Otherwise, we're going to miss it. We're going to miss the opportunity for the intimacy that He wants with us during those difficult times when we don't understand anything and that we're suffering loss. And I don't know what your darkness is today. Maybe it was you've been through some dark times like I was with the Father. But when He fills that void with Himself and He says, I'm here, just understand that it'll be okay. And He will walk with you through the entire time. And He will lift you up and He will restore you as He is me. Don't stop praying for me because I got a journey yet ahead. It's halftime. So we love you guys so much and thank you from the bottom of our hearts. All the love and prayers that you said on our behalf. If I were to ask in front of the congregation how many people have prayed for me, I swear the whole congregation, as much as we can ascertain, the people that have come up for updates constantly when I was still in the hospital. That's the kind of church that this Mission Hills Church is. It's a praying church that cares for its body. And I am grateful to know you, to share the love of Christ with you and my understanding of His Word. I enjoy sharing His Word with you guys. And I just give Him the praise and the glory for where I am today. And you guys are part of that recovery, so thank you. Thank you, Linda.